Hello, this is the Psychology of Human Relationships, and we're discussing the processes involved in listening effectively to others, Part 1. So, I want to impress upon you that it's very difficult to know how things have changed over time without the added benefit of having seen the changes yourself. But I can tell you that in a number of measurements that are taken, including the amount of time people are distracted, that things have changed. One of the big things that has happened is that people now have phones. And I don't even know why they call them phones because they rarely involve phone calls. But nevertheless, phones became common in a portable, affordable way, really not before 2000 in any significant way. Sure, they were available in bulkier ways, but not everybody had them. It seems as if everyone has them. And that facilitated the ability to communicate in different ways: FaceTiming, texting, messaging, all sorts of things. But each of those ways has removed the face to face methods of communication, or what has been with humans forever, which is face to face communication. That's what 99.999% of our history has been, face to face. At any rate, a few definitions. Hearing is the biology of sound reception, so what you're hearing through your ears, and listening refers to understanding words, but that means that we're obligated to acknowledge that words are symbolic, and people use words differently in terms of their overt meaning, but also in terms of their symbolic meaning. Okay? A few myths about communication include the idea that it is possible to not communicate. No, silence is generally quite pregnant with meaning. The second myth is that words are the primary vehicle. You know that that's not true. There are some estimates that over 90% of communication, face to face anyway, is mostly at the nonverbal level, including the way you say things, of volume and tone and frequency and those kinds of things. That meaning is assigned by the sender. No, it's not. The meaning is hopefully consistent with what the sender wanted to present, but the meaning is assigned by the receiver of the message, hence a source of errors. More communication is always better. No, it's not. Some people actually don't say much in terms of meaning, but say a lot in terms of words. Yes? And lastly, that we cause another person to feel a certain way. We really don't. The words are laden with emotion often, and they have meaning, and we are sometimes triggered by those to have a cascade of emotions based on our own memory, based on the meaning those words have, and the investment we have in the person who's sending the message. Well, why do we communicate? For a number of reasons. Let's take physical needs for one. Did you know that the research is fairly clear that if you don't speak effectively, if you don't communicate effectively, you are under greater stress, and over time that diminishes your immune system. So we know that people who are not good at communicating are ones who suffer opportunistic infections more commonly, and even the risk for cancer is greater. We know that cancer risk is greater for people who are divorced when compared to married counterpoints. And so there's lots of research on this. I know it sounds odd, but it's true. Social needs are met. The research suggests that there's a strong link between effective communication and well being. Yeah. because you're seeing all sorts of ways in which communication is useful. Even in the workplace, we know that effective communication helps us find a job and keep a job. Communication skills rank higher than technical competence unless it requires a long-term investment in training, work experience, and specific degree earned. In fact, when companies are downsizing, one of the things they don't like to do is get rid of someone who is a good communicator. We have yet to define what that means, by the way. Well, so something to keep in mind is that you have already heard me say there is a sender and a receiver, and within each person, let's assume there's two people and they're communicating in one way or another, that in each person there is a set of different environmental qualities. So if you were face to face, you share the same outside environment, but your inside environment is different. You have noise in your head, you've got things running through your head that are distracting you or commenting on the conversation or the person that's speaking to you. That's a distraction. It's a different environment. You may not feel well, or you may feel well. It's a different environment. One person may be ill, another person not. That's going to affect the communication. The method of communication impacts the quality of the communication. So if you are on a phone doing face-to-face talk, or you are on Facebook in messaging, or you are emailing, or you are sending a text, all of those things have different levels of error. The worst is a short text. That would be the highest source of error. Possibility of having errors, that is. So even in face-to-face, we have things like verbal and nonverbal messages that people may not pick up on or be in error about their conclusions. We have intentional messages that we send, and we have unintentional messages that we send. It's all quite fascinating how much error can be involved. You know, most disagreements and arguments start from a misunderstanding of another person's perspective and position. That's often what happens. Not the only source of error, but it is a common source of error. Do you know how it feels when someone really listens to you? Is that a good feeling? I suspect it is. I suspect it gives you warm fuzzies, makes you feel like you're really heard. Yeah? Do you know what it means or what the indicators are for someone who's really listening? What do you do when you really listen? So what's the big deal about all this? Well, I want to bring it to a larger context. We actually learn about our culture through listening. And of course, there's all sorts of sources for the condition of our culture and the values of our culture. And that we hear and that we see. But think about it. The vast history of human beings involves listening to stories about our origins and our place in the universe and our values as a culture or tribe. That's what most of us did in our ancestral heritage. We learn to think by listening. You know, there is a strong supposition that our brains are not the same when we hear things we didn't know before we heard them. So you actually change at least the physiology of your brain, if not the construction of your brain, by hearing things that are new and different and by considering what you're hearing. We learn about ourselves by listening. We compare and contrast. We learn about how our values, for example, are different or the same or nuanced differently from others by listening. We learn about all kinds of things about ourselves by listening. We also, lastly, learn to love by listening. You actually can't love someone truly, individually, unless you know them, and you can't know them if they don't speak about themselves at fair depth. Yes? So you can love them independent of knowing them as far as being a human being. You can love and respect them, and love and respect are very closely related. But you can't really love someone romantically, individually, without listening to them, and vice versa. Okay? Being listened to means that we're taken seriously, that our ideas and our feelings are known, that what we have to say matters, which means that we matter. It shows respect, it builds trust, and it cements relationships. So, I mentioned being distracted. We are now distracted by most measures that have been made. There haven't been many, but by most of those that have been made, we're preoccupied or involved in some aspect of forgetting what we're hearing in the moment about 75% of the time. And how many people have had formal training in all of this stuff that we're talking about? Probably less than 2%. Well, what's the most irritating class of things that we do? What are the most irritating things? Well, one of those clearly has to be interrupting. Do you not hate it when you're interrupted? Yeah, I do. I'm afraid I've done that, and I work on that so that I don't do that. I get excited about what someone's saying, or I think I know something about this, and I have a tendency to interrupt. I've got much, much better at it. And so can you, as to any of these that you do, if you'll admit it first. Not looking at someone when they're talking. People are very shy or socially awkward or anxious may not do that. That's a transmission that you may not be interested, though that may or may not be true. Rushing someone to hurry up and finish what they're saying, being distracted by your phone or some other thing, finishing someone's sentences, judging someone, and by this I mean saying you shouldn't feel that way, why don't you just do that, telling them what to do, which is a form of judgment, isn't it? It's a judgment that they don't know how to behave for themselves or determine their own solutions. Yeah, those are some really bad habits. I think it's important to think. As an acronym, that means T, is it true? H, is it helpful? I, is it inspiring? N, is it necessary? And K, is it kind? We can fulfill most or all of those things if we think before we speak. Yeah? Okay. Well, what's empathy? We've talked about empathy before. I want to talk about it one last time. Empathy has two stages, two parts. One is the cognitive aspect of empathy, where you understand, you get it in your brain, in your mind, that this person has a certain emotional condition or a certain situation that they're dealing with. You get it. They're sad, they had a bad grade on a test, whatever it may be. Okay? But there's a second aspect to the process of empathy, and that has to do with what some have called experiential empathy. I call it immediate empathy, which is where you are having some aspects of their emotional condition or their situation, like the spider running up someone's arm, which you recoil even though it's not on your arm, because you have what we call mirror neurons. Most of us anyway have those, and they're operating in most cases, that give us a sense of what someone else's frame of reference is at the moment, hence the name immediacy. So these neurons are located in a particular place in the brain, the anterior cingulate, and this part of the brain lights up when we, for most of us, observe the condition of another, particularly if the condition of another is one of danger or needing assistance immediately. Yes? Okay. Well, in a way to talk about empathy differently than I have in the past, let's talk about how you increase empathy, and that'll be in part 2.